Welcome. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of Episcopal Parish Network and really pleased to have you with us today for this special webinar. This was a workshop that was presented at our most recent conference in Kansas City. It was really powerful and spoke to the folks who were able to attend it in person, and we wanted to make it available to the church at large. So I'm thrilled to have these wonderful colleagues from around the church to share with you today. It's going to be a terrific conversation, I know. I want to remind you that next year we will be gathering in person here in Charlotte, where I am sitting with Anne-Marie Witchker, one of our panelists. She's directly across the table from me and will be speaking soon. But March 3rd through 6th of next year, we will be here in Charlotte at St. Peter's, where we are sitting right now, and Christ Church, our other parish host, to put on additional panels similar to the one that you're about to hear. So we invite you to be with us. Also, please be on the lookout for our webinars, which take place regularly. We have another one coming up tomorrow on preaching in this moment. If you are available and interested, we'd invite you to join that session. So without further ado from me, I'm going to turn it over to these folks who have some really important thoughts and a wonderful conversation ahead for you. Grateful for you joining us, grateful for them joining us, and look forward to being in touch soon. Thanks so much. Anne-Marie?
Okay, thank you so much, Joe. It is wonderful to be with all of you today. I'm especially grateful to our panelists for having the second part of the conversation today. My name is Anne-Marie. I'm the rector at St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, a wonderful, vibrant, and historic church in the East Village in New York City. And as Joe mentioned, we're here in Charlotte doing some planning work for the Episcopal Parish Network next year. We hope everyone can join us. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we'll start just with some introductions of them. Again, I know some of you may have been with us at the workshop in Charlotte, but in Kansas City earlier this year, but most folks probably weren't. So this will be this is part two of the conversation, but really what you're seeing is just the ongoing synergy between three wonderful leaders who are great thought leaders for the times that we're in. So grateful to be continuing this conversation. Lydia Buckland is the president and dean of Episcopal Divinity School. Yejide Pieterson is the associate dean and director of formation at Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. And Jorge Ortiz is the priest and associate director for community engagement at Trinity Church in New York City. All three of our panelists, as I said, are wonderful thought leaders for the church, and especially in these times have, through their words and actions, shown us what it means to be people of both moral courage and moral imagination through these times. So Lydia, would you tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and how you're understanding your call to ministry for this moment?
Sure. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Really, it's a pleasure to be with you all, with everyone, with all of our participants, but especially with my colleagues, Jorge, Yejide, and you, Anne-Marie. The workshop that we had together was really powerful and moving and left me buzzing with excitement for more. And so I'm really glad to have this opportunity. So I, as you said, serve as the president and dean of Episcopal Divinity School. Episcopal Divinity School is a historic Episcopal seminary, which is reimagining who we might be to provide accessible theological education that is leaning towards justice and towards forming and educating leaders for a more just world. And so interestingly, we have found ourselves pivoting and positioned pretty well for the current times, actually, because we now have some resources and flexibility to respond in the moment to some of the issues that we're facing as a church and world, particularly around the rights of folks that have come to the country recently, particularly around LGBTQ+, particularly trans rights, all of these all of the things that feel to be a bit under attack, or that we're needing to speak to from a place of faith, EDS is positioned to speak to and to gather theologians to reflect on in kind of new, fresh ways. And so that's kind of the immediate low-hanging fruit that we find ourselves engaging in currently, and then also planning and visioning where we'll be in terms of more holistic theological education and experiences for folks in training for ministry.
Thank you, Lydia. Jorge, would you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you're understanding your call to ministry for this moment?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jorge Ortiz. I am a priest here at Trinity. I'm also the Associate Director for Community Engagement. It's been an exciting time, especially here at Trinity, in which not only the church, Trinity Church, but also the diocese, I would say, stand up and step in to actually welcome our new neighbors in New York and see how we could, in one way or another, join efforts to meet not only their physical needs, but also their spiritual needs. It's been quite the experience. It's been an honor for this community to have them here, to see them around, to give us a good time to think about how we can serve them. Last year, we more or less have 1,800 a week, either receiving our programs and benefiting of the programs we offer them, and also participating in different services in church. I would like to describe myself as a person and my call as a person of community and service. Since I was interested in giving my life to the kingdom of God, which was very early when I was a Franciscan, and I was a Franciscan for almost 20 years. And then as in my 15 years of ministry as an ordained person, I've been trying to understand what is the role of faith communities, especially in the public life, and how those communities, when we're living the gospel of Christ, can empower people with meaning and purpose at individual level and social levels. So that's kind of how I see my call these days in what I do and how I try to do ministry in the middle of the circumstances we have, and see how our community responds to those challenges and needs that our people are having.
Thank you, Jorge. Yejide, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and your call for these times?
I'm Yejide Pieterson, and I'm the Associate Dean and Director of Formation at Berkeley Divinity School at Yale, which is the Episcopal Seminary at Yale Divinity School. And I am so incredibly grateful for the phenomenal people who I call colleagues, both lay and ordained, who teach there, who work there, who serve there, who are members of the New Haven community. And New Haven is a complex place. It's a place where lots of students come from all over the world to study at an elite institution. And it's also a place with the ordinary problems many and challenges many American cities face. And so what I believe that I might be able to bring to this conversation is my own experience of many years as a parish priest in the Episcopal tradition, as well as abroad in the Church of England. But more importantly, perhaps the opportunity to think with those of you who are on this call, with my colleagues here, about the ways in which formation for ministry prepares us to meet these moments. And by formation in ministry, I don't just mean if you go to seminary somewhere, you enroll in a program, but how we prepare ourselves spiritually, morally, and theologically to meet this moment, a moment that is very challenging and testing. And from my life, I have to join Jorge and say that I see my life as a life of service. And I began my call as someone who worked with what we often call the last and the least, but who I see as Jesus' beloved, people who are undomiciled, people whose documents aren't quite what people want them to be, people who have been cast away. But it is here at church that we are meant to center those who the world is saying are at the margins. And this is why this conversation is so important and so dear to my heart.
Thank you, Yejide. I'm so grateful to everybody who's sharing where they're from in the chat. I just want to highlight for our conversation here that we're joined by folks from all over the country and the world. So Haiti, California, Montreal, Texas, New Hampshire, New York City, so many wonderful places. Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to Catherine Meeks. Yejide, if we can stick with you, we're seeing increasingly, right, that to be faithful people in these times means to be people of moral courage, and that's being tested and tried in new ways through these times. Can you say a little bit about what that means for the church today? How are you seeing that? What does that mean for our call as a church?
Well, I think about the motto of the school where I serve. For Yale, the model is light and truth. And I think about that as essential to the Christian understanding of what the gospel is really about, light and truth. So the light to see things as they really are, the light of Christ that illuminates the world as it is, and the truth, being able to both discern the truth, accept the truth, and then to share that truth with other people. And those are really difficult things when you're combating things that are focused on shadow, focus, and I don't want to say the word darkness. I don't want to put black and white against each other. I'm really uncomfortable with those kinds of dichotomies in the world that we live in today. But rather, I would say people who want to operate in secret and behind closed doors with no light, so that they can disappear people and do other things. And so I think the moral compass is something that we can't wait for a moment to develop. If we're not developing it the whole time, then it's not going to happen. And the challenge of this moment is that we're here now. And so there are people who have been aware of this moment coming for many years and who have tried to share with us some possibility and some tools about how we might meet such moments that have been with us all along. Unfortunately, in the history of European settlement in this part of the world, these moments have been occurring all along, and in all parts of the world, really. Unfortunately, this is a tragedy of human engagement in this modern life. On the other hand, I think now it's not enough just to get a primer and sort of brush up on a few things. It's like if you think about, oh, I'm going to go on traveling to Europe, I'd love to have Duolingo so I can learn a few words in French. Like that's great for traveling to Europe on a vacation for a week. But if you know that you're going to be immersed in something, you have to put your mind to the task. And that's where we have to be right now. And I think one of the biggest challenges we face is that we see ourselves in a moral vacuum, as though no one has ever been dealing with these challenges before, as if no societies have ever faced such difficulties. Before we had this conversation, we actually had a pre-conversation where we talked with one another, and the idea that there is language for the things that we are experiencing right now, that others who have this as a center part of their reality, a place in which a democracy is failing, and there are promises of human dignity that are not being affirmed, a place where that is not just an anomalous thing, but is openly done by a government in ways that are absolutely fearless. That is a reality that many of our siblings in the two-thirds world have known. And I think we would be wise to listen carefully to the ways in which people describe those moments and the things they bring to meet that moment. So the first thing I want to say is we need to be reading and listening to voices from outside of the United States, voices from places like Central America, like Central Africa, like Southern Africa, where there have been situations like this, and people have talked about how they've persevered in the face of what seems insurmountable difficulty. And the other thing is to ask ourselves within our own borders, who within these borders have things to say to us about this moment. I think about Bishop Stephen Charlton and his incredible work about the genocidal reality and how the moral imagination of indigenous peoples sees a future in the midst of something that is just a world-ending calamity. And I think that there's wisdom and knowledge for us in our indigenous siblings' experience and truth telling about this moment. In our siblings who are Black and brown here and throughout the world, we have lots to draw on. But I think decentering a voice that's been sort of the dominant voice here, which is the voice of a learned person of a certain skin tone with a certain class experience as the primary way to understand this moment, that's probably not the best primer. And we're not in a Duolingo moment. We're in a moment where we really need to get down to serious work about understanding this and collaborating with those who understand how one remains steadfast in the face of real evil, of real human depravity, of the worst that we can do to one another. So that for me gives me hope, and I see Christ at the center of all of that. I think Jesus Christ is our promise for how that's possible. And so for me, the really difficult moral questions will remain difficult, but Jesus is not difficult. He's just hard to follow. And so that gives me hope, and it also challenges me. And that's why I love being in these conversations, so I can be challenged and also get some hope.
Thank you, Yejide. Lydia, would you jump in? How are you understanding moral courage in this moment? And maybe also, as Yejide shared, a little about how you're seeing the moment that we're in. What is the moment that we're in?
Yeah, gosh, I think Yejide speaks so wisely about this moment not being a unique moment in time, but a continuation of kind of how things have been set, how this whole system has set us up to get to this place. I think as settler Christians, it's time for us to maybe move away from a stance of restlessness and agitation and greed, and away from autonomy and control and power, and instead to a stance of community and of vulnerability and relying on one another, and mostly relying on God. And I know that's very difficult for people who have historically had power and control and not had to worry about a lot of things. And but until we turn towards one another and decenter ourselves as white colonial settlers, I don't know that we're going to be able to heal and reconcile with the long path of what's already happened. And I think, to be honest with ourselves, that it's some really bad theology done in the name of God and in the name of Jesus is what kind of got us into this mess. The doctrine of discovery and the justification for treating other human beings as less than because of a number of different factors of how we have privileged some more than others, and how people have been objectified and have been seen as animalistic or creatures. I mean, that is built into our DNA as Christians, especially here in the United States, and it continues to seep into places that we might want to turn our heads away from. But I think confronting that and continuing to lament that and continuing to work towards a more just future is our work to do as faithful Christians, and that takes courage. And it takes hope that we can live in a different way together, even if we maybe haven't realized that yet. But we have to have the humility to know we can't do it alone. I think also just not turning away from it. I mean, I think so many of us have enough privilege and power in our daily lives that it's easy to turn off the TV or to flip to a new screen on the news and to think of those other situations as other folks, even in our own towns, or to say, oh, thank God I have food on my table, and thank God I can afford my groceries, or that my kids are safe. And then we double down and kind of protect ourselves in our own little isolation. And just a reminder that that is not who God created us to be. God created us to be in community, and God created us for one another. And I mean, even just facing the reality of what's happening is actually kind of courageous right now, because it takes emotional, it's exhausting, right? It is exhausting to show up and to step up and to stand up and to speak up, especially in the midst of a culture that maybe is saying, okay, enough already. Let's just either wait it out for the next administration, or just figure out how to get through it for ourselves. But instead to say, no, actually, we're called to something more. We're called to take a stand when it's time to take a stand, as we've saw our presiding bishop do recently with the, the expectation or demand that we resettle Afrikaners, and that he didn't, and the Episcopal churches lost money for that, and people have lost jobs, and like there's a real loss at taking a stand and showing that kind of moral courage. But it actually does have an impact to say we cannot be complicit in a system that continues to perpetuate this kind of oppression, that's not easy. That's hard. How we spend our resources, how we invest, how we, there's so many decisions each of us can make in our daily lives to contribute and have moral courage, and just have the hope that enough of us take a stand together that it turns this arc towards a better way. I'm going to let Jorge share too.
Thanks, Lydia. Yeah, Jorge, can you tell us about how you're seeing the current moment and moral courage? And also just want to highlight, Lydia brought up the recent statement, Sean Rowe's statement about Episcopal migration ministries. Invite everyone here to reflect on that, as we talk about moral courage and the discernment around that, right, and the risks around it. How do we understand when a moment requires our moral action? Where do we find that line? How do we know, how do we do that discernment together as a church and in our communities? Jorge.
Yeah, I think the center of moral courage for us today undoubtedly is the gospel of Christ. I think we all know it. We all study that. We know a lot of theology about that. But Jesus clearly said, do not be afraid, right? Even when the disciples and we are afraid. He said, do not be afraid. I think that's one of the most powerful phrases I hear all the time, especially after Easter, when he showed up in the middle of them. Do not be afraid. And the moral courage for us is the content of the gospel of Christ. And that is beautifully translated into our baptismal covenant, right? And I feel, of course, all of you know this better than me because I'm just an Episcopalian and in the family recently, but this is what I fell in love with, right? And the Episcopal Church has been clear about which one is our values. And I think it's God's time that is asking us to live, maybe not to do too many things, but to be with people, to be courageous and say, these are our values, and in line to the action of the presiding bishop is because these are our values, we do not compromise those values, no matter what circumstances we are living, because that's what Jesus did, right? And I think that's going to be important because that is going to help us to remember that there are powerful things that actually are going to move our life with passion and decision, and that is commitment to our call, commitment to what is the meaning of this being Christian in this world, and therefore, as our previous presentation would say, how we should now that is our time to be and act like Jesus in the middle of these circumstances, because now we are the light and the salt, and now I think it's the moment for the Episcopal Church in which those values are compromised in our society to put the light of those values there. Being with people, probably not, many times we don't know what to do, but being with them, we will find the wisdom because we are confident that God is with us. And when God is with us and we are with our siblings, living our values, there is when we see different things and transforming the rhetorics that we have now that they want to destroy our dignity, that want to destroy many people, that want to use many people as their toys, or are the people that they can move and make decisions upon them as they wish, because they feel super powerful, because their arrogance is so big. And this is when we need to be there. And only Jesus said, you will know in them because of their actions, because how they are in this world. And I think that should be kind of something that we know, but something that we need to kind of keep reminding ourselves, because we are human. We are like the apostles. I mean, I'll get it. Many times I forget that. I still many times don't get what Jesus wants me to do. But it's important that we encourage ourselves to think that we can bring light. That's moral courage, no matter what happens. But you do it. You be with people and see what happens. Many times we know in ministry that that's actually true ministry. You're with people and you see things that were unexpected, that surprises you all the time. I think we need to remember that that's powerful, that we have this gospel of Christ, that we have the power of prayer, of the spiritual life to nourish the world, and we together stand up for our values.
All right, could you say a little bit more about how you're seeing that kind of dynamic play out in community, like in the work that you're doing at Trinity? I think the one of the main tactics of this time is to keep everybody feeling confused and chaotic and afraid. And so as faith communities, to live into the values that you're talking about, to not compromise on our values and to stay clear about who we are and how we're called to be with each other and how God is with us. How do you see that playing out? How do you do that work in your daily ministry? How do you see that in the programs and ministries that you lead?
Well, I think first, being with people, again, being a church that is outside, having that encounter with those who are struggling and listen to them, right? Many times we think that we can create programs for outreach, but we have discovered here that is important. The first step is important to listen to what our people and how they want us to serve, how they need us to serve them. So that's has been important for us. So everything we have done, from church services that you might not imagine that you need, like marrying 18 couples in our service, you know, like having 18 quinceañeras, because that's important for their life, but also like empower them through the legal knowledge, you know, empower them to say you have these rights. Constitutionally speaking, no one can actually attack those rights because you're a human being and we're here for you, right? To support you, to get that knowledge. So I think it is that to be able to and also be able to engage more people in the work, embrace that work with the community, because it's not the job of the priest, it's not only, but seeing how we can work together. Here at Trinity, for example, what really impresses me is that we clergy all try to figure out together how we can do it together. At the moment is how the different programs serve together, but also how we engage the congregation, right? And they feel also empowered to serve. They can do more for their siblings in New York City. And we see that a community, a church community, a congregation that responds to that call, because they see that there is a genuine and deeply attitude to care and serve the new neighbors, to say, like, even to everyone, to proclaiming, these are your siblings, right? We are all children of the same God. And to do it, you see how people actually start responding, because it's amazing. I mean, people are responding in big numbers. We have different programs, different activities, and the revolution of love and the love of Christ and the guidance of the Holy Spirit is what moved them to understand and probably to eradicate that rhetoric, because many people have the different position about the new neighbors, but when they see these, it's like, actually what's wrong. These people are here to contribute to the country. These people have a lot of values to give and be with us and grow with us. So I think that's the moment, I would say, I know the Episcopal Church is really rich in the theological tradition, is really rich in the words and the narrative, but it's time, is what I feel, for us to be outside, to be with people, to do God's love among them. I think that's the call, because we are clear about which are our values, even with values for the respect of the dignity of the LGBTQ plus community, for the new neighbors, for creation. All of that is in our core identity is under attack, right? And we need to be there to counter those cultures of death, and those cultures that want to destroy and treat people differently, when they know we all are the same, we have the same dignity.
Thank you, Jorge. Yejide, could you speak to this question too? And I'm wondering, how do we maintain moral clarity? How do we build resilience at a time that is chaotic, overwhelming, full of fear? Thinking especially in your role working on the formation of new clergy or seminarians, how do we both develop and maintain our moral clarity and build resilience through a chaotic time?
As somebody who thinks so much, as somebody who came into church from the African American tradition, which is like many culturally based traditions, extends through a variety of denominations. You go to St. Sabina's in Chicago, and it's a Roman Catholic church, but it's an African American centered Roman Catholic church experience, and the service is 2.5 hours. And I say that as an aside to say that my own moral imagination has been so shaped by my ancestral experiences as someone whose family is from this particular part of the world, in the main. I would want to wonder, and not from here, but this is where my family story begins in many ways, for complicated reasons having to do with human trafficking and the slave trade, aka giant human trafficking on a massive level. And I think it's important the words that we use about these things, because it brings to bear the sheer savagery and awfulness of this whole experience and how we might have gotten to this moment. But I think the moral courage to do hard things as a Christian person begins with prayer. And so many of the people that we hold up as giants of the faith who do such hard things, I mean, some of them were on house arrest for many years, people who were forced into exile, people who lost their lives, people whose loved ones were killed in front of them. I mean, these are people that are not just sort of superheroes of the faith, but ordinary Christian people that are living among us and with us. And these are people who attest to the reality that without a life of deep connection with God, there is no well from which we can draw. And I think part of that is also finding spiritual friends, whether we are feeling like no one where we are gets us. We are all able in this age to, when we're connecting here through Zoom, to connect with spiritual mentors, even in the form of a book. And I think about the reality that the gift that we have, even if we can't read or we don't feel confident, we could listen to an audiobook. Even if we can't afford to buy one, we can get one from the library. Even if we don't have access to a library card, maybe a friend does. And I want to say that I don't know who's on this screen. There are probably people who are listening to this right now, who a loved one, a person who they care about, they themselves don't know what their status will be. As an African American person, my status has been consistently not respected in this country, despite most of the people that I'm related to having been naturalized or born here, right? So I want to be really clear and say that the moral courage to do the thing that's hard, there's no magical solution to it. The first part is it begins with prayer. The second part, it begins in knowing that you're not alone. Even though we might feel like Elijah and there's no one around us, we stand in a line of people, known and unknown, who have done great things for God. And it's really important for us to read the things that these people have written, to listen to their words, because right now we're in a crisis of our own imaginations. We spend so much time being inundated with the hateful rhetoric of a particular person who has a lot of power to speak their word of, I would say, of death into people. speak a word of fear, a word of overwhelm, a word of despair. And in order to combat that, I think about what our siblings in South Africa knew when non-white people knew that they were not going to be made free through the very same Afrikaner people that are here now, their forebears and even their parents, some of them were people who were deeply invested in people who were not white, not having full access to life and hope. But they knew that reading and hearing the words of other people and their own people was a way to be free. There's a freedom in knowing that no one can take, as my grandmother would say, no one can take your mind from you. What you learn is yours to share with others. And so each of us is empowered, not because we have a collar, not because we have a degree, but because we are a child of God with our own mind and our own heart and our own voice. And so the moral courage begins with the ability to say what is true. What is true is that people are being disappeared. What is true is that people are living in terror. What is true is that we are unclear right now about whether we live in a democracy or some other form of government, and that matters for our Christian witness. Because as the ability to speak honestly about what we perceive to be true is eroded, we lose the capacity to join in community with other people and to really understand the moment we're living in. So this is not about some political thing. This is a serious crisis of moral imagination. But we are not alone. And I'm going to put in the chat the names of people who have come before us who wrote in plain spoken in their own languages to reach people who were not super educated, to say, hey, you can do this in a study with 3 friends. You can pull out a dictionary and read this because it's not written in a complicated way, because they believed, and I believe that this matters, not for people in academies, for people, ordinary people who want to do what Father Jorge is talking about, who want to make sure that where they are, the people who are living in fear and terror are not alone. And we can only be in solidarity in as much as we're willing to listen, but also to really read the signs of the times. Because you know what's exhausting? When you're suffering and you have to explain every piece of your suffering to someone else because they haven't done any work. They just show up and say, tell me your whole story. Well, you know, if my whole story is I've been tortured, I really don't want to tell you my whole story. I want to believe that you did some work before you got here to understand that I want to talk today about my child turning 15 and how we're going to have a party for them. And I don't have that money right now, but we want to make that happen. I want to talk today about the fact that I'm really scared when I come home at night and I don't know if someone's going to take my money out of my pocket because I get paid in cash. I don't want to tell you what made me get up out of my home and take my whole family on a dangerous journey to get here. Could you do some reading? And we owe that to one another. And we owe that to our own tradition. Our tradition isn't just Athanasius. It isn't just, you know, the church fathers and mothers. It's also the people who lived in this century and the one before this that are telling us about things. And I want to highlight something that Lydia brought to our attention yesterday, which is just so important. What's happening in El Salvador needs to be said. And I'm going to leave that moment for her to speak to, but the moral courage to speak truthfully about things that directly impact our lives. And not to pretend that the moral line is somewhere out there in Washington. It's right here. It's right here. The fact that people could watch a brown woman with brown skin and a hijab, be carted away by people who had no identification and people didn't stand up. And I say that happened because this is a country where many people who have looked like me and Jorge have been carted away to many places and no one stood up. So our moral imagination to imagine the humanity of particular people is compromised. And in order to restore that, to move away from fear, move away from these tropes that have been really, we are co-creating them every day by not resisting them. The only way to do that is to listen, to hear, to honor, and most of all, to center our life on Jesus Christ, who alone can give us the wisdom to move to this moment. Because I don't know, the moral moment could meet you tomorrow. It could meet you tonight. It could be a friend calling and saying to you, I'm so scared and I don't have any money. I think I need to leave. It could be someone saying to you, I don't think you should say that at the faculty meeting tomorrow. I don't know what it will be for you, but it's coming for everyone. It's coming for everyone because that's what it means to live in a country that is moving toward authoritarianism. It means that people are unconsciously bridling their tongues and removing their actions of generosity for fear of for touching the contaminant, touching the person who is the Azazel, the person who's going to be cast out. They're afraid of being connected. But I have to tell you, if that's how we're going to be, we are so far from Christ. And we don't get the right to claim the cross of Christ just for our own personal interior struggles and those of our family members, what some people are saying, but rather in our capacity to understand the moment in which we live and to align ourselves with those who are so vulnerable. And if we ourselves are vulnerable, to trust, to have a capacity to trust that the people who say that there are our colleagues and friends will be there for us. I want to believe if someone comes to my door and says that my husband and I are being taken away, that someone will come to my aid. I don't know if that's true. Because I got hope from seeing that letter from the bishop, but I want to believe that we're becoming a church that could do that and not be so afraid of our own safety that we let people we don't even know and people we know be taken away for fear of something happening to the people that we love. And all that's hard. But I think that we are called to a life of preparing for that moment, not if it comes, when it comes. The time of trial isn't the time of trial because something hard happens. It's a time of trial because we're caught unaware and we don't have Christ to lean on. And so we are in the shadow of death and we feel there's no way out. That's the time of trial. When you don't actually have access to God or think you don't. And I think a lot of us find ourselves there in that moral moment we hope to meet. And so what we can do together is build communities where we're actually helping people to get into the gym and get physically fit in that spiritual sense, right? Build up the musculature to be able to say, I'm meeting this moment in my fear because I know a God and there is one that saves. And that one does not sit in Pennsylvania Avenue or any other place on this earth. And I am afraid, but I'm going to do it anyway. It takes that kind of daily commitment to community and prayer and faithfulness and sacraments. The sacrament of presence with one another, presence with Christ, those are strengthening us for this supernatural battle. Supernatural because it's really beyond us, even though it's happening around us. It really is a lot. So I want to acknowledge that. And so I'm going to put these titles in the chat, and the titles are After Whiteness by Willie James Jennings, We Drink from Our Own Wells by Gustavo Gutierrez, If This Is Treason, I Am Guilty by Alan Bosak, Womanist Ethics and the Cultural Production of Evil by Emily Towns, and Immigration and Apocalypse by Yi Jianlin. And I chose to put people who are from a variety of places, and I'm going to put Bishop Charleston's book in as well, because I think we need to really widen our scope and listen to a lot of different voices. Christianity is so broad and so wide, and we are so blessed. Let's lean deeply into that deep well of wisdom and truth-telling that can strengthen us for the day. Don't be afraid. Jesus is always with us.
Thank you, Yejide. Lydia, would you speak to this question of developing this capacity that Yejide is talking about? How do we stay awake? How do we stay alert? How do we keep ourselves alive to the moment that we're in? How can we develop that capacity? And how does that lead toward moral imagination too? Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. No, I'm sorry, Anne Marie. I just want to follow up on something Yejide mentioned that is kind of a real moment type thing happening. At EDS, we host webinars regularly, and we had one scheduled today, which actually we had this afternoon with the organization called Cristasol, which is a human rights organization that works exclusively in Central America. They're located in El Salvador, but also have offices in Honduras and Guatemala. And one of the panelists we were expecting today was disappeared on Sunday evening. Her name is Ruth Lopez, and in the press release, they wrote that she was the victim of a short-term enforced disappearance, and her position is as the head of the anti-corruption unit, which tells you about the work that she was doing with the organization. And so that webinar will be up on our YouTube, on the EDS YouTube channel this evening if people want to learn more about that. But Christosol is an Episcopal affiliated organization. And so it's a pressing matter and is, a reality check to the dangers of moral courage and of standing up and doing this work in this ministry. This is, I feel after yesterday's sharing, I feel like this is maybe a little simple, but I think it's also profound that what came to my mind in terms of staying alert and staying resilient is just the simplicity of like finding joy and connecting with children and connecting with creation, and really like these tangible moments of like what is real and what is in front of us that like we can grasp and provide tender care and receive tender care and connection. And as Jorge talks about, like being outdoors with other human beings, like when we are invited, I think especially as congregational leaders, when we are invited to a community event or to a community like march, like to a pride event or pride parade, when we're invited to a neighborhood like parade or barbecue, or like showing up and actually like being with other human beings, especially those who we wouldn't otherwise, like especially those who don't come into the church buildings, right, but who live around in our neighbors in daily life, like just being together, breaking bread, sharing vulnerable and intimate moments together, and receiving that love and care and giving that love and care is like, for me, the recipe for filling my cup so that I can then do the work of calling things out and reading and knowing, but just that the very like human need for care and both giving and receiving.
Thank you, Lydia. I want to turn back to Jorge. I think, we've talked a lot about moral courage. Yejide also brought up moral imagination, right? And obviously the two are connected. We need moral clarity and moral courage to be able to develop an imagination that moves us toward a more just future. I'm wondering in our communities, in our work, as we look around the church and around the world, where are we seeing signs of hope and new life? Where are we seeing sort of Easter emerge? And Jorge, especially invite you, I think you have some photos to share with us about ways that you're seeing this alive in the communities you serve.
Yeah, as Trinity, I think the clear message we have for these days is we're people of courage and hope. And that's the central message on our preaching across the board. The voice has been said by our rector, and unequivocal, and also without hesitation. He is clear on we are welcome the strangers, we welcome our neighbors, new neighbors, and the work continue despite the fact that there are different challenges. But that's the clarity we have as a church. Is easy? No, it's not easy. We know and have all the solutions? No, we don't. We probably not prepared for different things that we have been doing, and that's the truth. But we are here, and that's clarity. And I remember here that we actually have in front of our church like a big stained glass window that he commissioned, and it's about the talents, and it's about the chapter 25 of the Gospel of Matthew. And we preach that that's not to tell the people outside, it's the reminder for ourselves of who we are as a church. And that it changed things because it allows us again to remember who we are and what we're called to be. And in that area, how I see hope first in the gospel of Christ. But I have two big names in my head and experience. One is I see hope. I remember when I was in Robben Island, in the cell that Nelson Mandela was there for more than 20 years. And the question I had in my head is like, if I had him in front of me, my question for him is how you could keep hope alive for so many years. How is it that you could keep that faith alive? And the second thing that I'm really inspired by is Martin Luther King Jr. when he said what hope is, and he says no optimism, right? Hope for us Christians is what God has done and will do in history. And I think that's kind of keep us grounded as a church and in the ministry. And that is why we see that incredibly, actually, people are coming more and more to see what we're doing here. And we are growing the church. And I'd like just to share, because the third source of hope that I have is my ministry. I feel privileged now that I'm serving as a facilitator on the ministries like LGBTQ plus ministry, creation care ministry, prison ministry here in our church, and plus serving our neighbors. So I like to tell you that that's my fourth source of hope, the people. And I want to show you some pictures for you to understand what kind of hope I'm talking about. Let me just share with you. I see hope when we seek and serve God with love for our neighbors. And these are people from our congregation participating in different programs. These are actually our new neighbors finding this church, in this church, a spiritual home. These are all new neighbors. New neighbors are the main altar of Trinity Church, asking to get the blessing for their weddings. When they have 2 blocks from here, the house court, that they could get married in only 2 days and didn't have to bother with this crazy priest about training and premarital counseling. This is not a normal picture that we see in weddings. This is a family getting married. And we knew that this was important because when these times they said thank you, because now we can demonstrate that they cannot separate us because we are a family. Then they wanted to be part of our family of faith. And we, Trinity Church, all together, think about how beautifully could do 64 baptisms in one service. Not only in Pentecost, but also in All Saints. In the beautiful quinceañeras. Preparing and giving them the space in this place, telling them that they are important for us and they are welcome. And as you see, many members of the community engage on this process. But also going out. This is a group of volunteers from Trinity Church doing work with Church of Our Savior, which is another Episcopal church in our neighborhood, serving meals for people in need. But even when they want us to stop and be silent about our values, just last Sunday, AIDS Walk New York, and more than 150 people, members of our congregation, either donated or participated in walking together. Seeing hope that when we are together, we can do great things, and even more when God is with us. That's the source of our hope and courage.
Jorge, thank you so much. We're close to the end of our time. We have a few more minutes. So we'd just love to hear from Lydia, Yejide, any closing words, signs of hope, places you would encourage folks to look for those signs of hope. And I think my guess is everyone's with me in sharing gratitude for Jorge for what you shared. Definitely feeling encouraged and inspired by those ministries. Thank you.
We can do it. The Episcopal Church can do it.
We really can. And I think where I find hope, yesterday was the graduation for my students, and they're very young, and you know, there's always prognostications about what's going to happen to Christianity, but the interesting news is that this generation is actually more religious than people ever expected. They are looking for hope, and they're looking for God, and they're looking, and even this sort of disaffection with church that previous generations had, they don't have. And so we have to be mindful of that. The story of Christ is true. That is what we base our hope on. I also think it's about beginning in a local way. All of the people who I think of as being mentors in the resistance of the kind of unhealth we're experiencing now in our country, whether it's in South Africa or it's in Peru or it's in Argentina or, you know, a number of other places, talked about people working together in small groups to study and to pray and to listen, and making sure those groups are places where people can be honest, can be supportive. That's where it starts. It starts there. It's not some grand project where from the great office of 815 something will be unveiled. It starts in a small way, having coffee with friends and saying, "Are you okay? You know, can we pray together? And I haven't seen so and so," or, you know, "I wonder what's going on with this or that." That's where the questions begin to form to which we will have answers. I just want to end by saying two things. Number one, when people ask where did Nelson Mandela get his faith, if you go to Nelson Mandela's house, which is on the same block as Desmond Tutu's house in Soweto in South Africa in Johannesburg, he never missed a day of Sunday school. He was a Methodist, and so Methodists used to give children tickets for every day you went to Sunday school. He got a perfect attendance award every single year as a child. And I cannot help but think that that is a huge part of how one has the capacity not to despair when you're in a cell and you're being treated like an animal by people who don't think you have the right to even exist. And the second thing I wanted to say is, like, let's not be fooled. My parents were anti-apartheid activists. People now are pretending as if that was some movement where everybody was supportive. That's not true. It's not true. It's not true that everyone was on the side of that. People thought that was dramatic, and it should be a relaxed and soft movement towards the freedom of people who weren't white in South Africa, for Black people. Just a slow movement towards freedom. We must persist in understanding that if we don't know the history of how God's people have gone towards freedom, we won't be able to actually enact the things that make freedom happen. And don't think that everyone who said they walked with Martin Luther King did it, because they didn't. And now he's everyone's friend, but he used to be the most hated person in America, which is to say, if we stand with Christ and we are willing to be wrong and to learn from each other, then we don't have anything to fear. And we must know for ourselves and for ourselves collectively that we are moving towards God's justice and God's goodness, even if other people might say what we're doing is seditious or unacceptable or illegal. Because Christ didn't come to fulfill every law that any government put in place, but to fulfill the law of love. The law of love, which is that all of us were made to be free and to live out fully exactly who God called us to be. So I say that to say, yeah, propaganda is everywhere, but love is stronger and better and wiser than anything else we could ever create, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah. Final words.
Oh, just great. Thanks. I know we're over. I'm just so grateful for the conversation as always, and looking forward to being in this work together.
Thank you. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Yejide, for this time and this incredibly rich conversation. Thanks to everyone who has joined. I think Laura put into the chat upcoming workshops. Again, we hope that this conversation continues in your own communities in whatever way that's possible. We're all in this together. So thank you.